I want to make one thing clear. I'm not some smartwatch power user. I think the very idea is goofy, and if you think it's important for a smartwatch to be able to run Crisis, mine Bitcoin, and scroll Twitter, we're gonna disagree. And I would hate for you to waste your time watching this video. Let me fix this now. That looked really threatening. So what's the point of a smartwatch then if I'm not breaking benchmarks, baby? Say that 10 times fast. I've asked myself this question for years. So this video is going to cover why do you need a watch? Why do you need a smartwatch? And what's the point of anything? We might get into that last one. I'm not sure. We'll see if we have time. As always, I'm not shilling anything. Garmin would rather die than sponsor a scrawny couch potato like myself.
Hot. Oh my God, so hot.
If there's links in the description, they might be affiliate links, which means if I recommend something that I really like, and then you go buy it through that link, I might see $1 of it. See you in another tax bracket, losers. Traditional watches have been around for probably a very long time. And in post, I'm going to figure out how long they have been around, and I'm just going to ADR over my...
While personal watches have been around since as early as the 1400s, wristwatches weren't really a thing until the 1830s, when they were seen as a silly way for women to keep time with their bracelets. 200 years later, the world still infantilizes women, but at least we can use our wristwatches to measure just how long we've been doing this bullshit for.
Pretty long, huh? Their primary purpose, since the beginning, has been to keep time. Eventually, at varying points in history, they've evolved secondary traits like a stopwatch, or an alarm clock, or a calendar. We got really good at making these watches for really cheap. And so, when smartwatches started to gain popularity in the 2010s, there needed to be a compelling reason for them to exist. At the time, the popular smartwatches that arose from that era were built around and marketed as accessories to your smartphones, as extensions of their function. Those popular smartwatches, the likes of Samsung and Apple and Motorola, are what I'm going to call device complementary watches, or DC watches for short. They've relied heavily or entirely on you owning or carrying a smartphone. Around the same time, though, there was a quieter rise of another type of smartwatch. This one wasn't as much an evolution of the timepiece and smartphone, but more so an evolution of the pedometer. These devices were less dependent on phone connectivity and in many cases were their own standalone devices. So I'll call those SA watches. They were less focused on proprietary phone operating systems, and they were more free to capitalize on improving hardware. Examples of these are Garmin watches, Polar watches, the Casio Pro Trek line, and even the late and great Pebble to an extent. Of course, you might notice some similarities between these SA watches. You wouldn't quite wear any of them to an interview. A lot of those pioneering SA models like the Coros or the Suunto or many of the Garmin watches sported a very chunky, rugged, outdoorsy aesthetic. That's because many of them were marketed towards people doing trail running and rock climbing, and frankly, there needed to be a lot of room in the chassis for all of those sensors. Now compare that to the more fashionable and mainstream design of the DC watches. The early Galaxy smartwatches and the Moto 360, a lot of those could be considered pretty fashionable. And that's where you get to something pretty important. Watches are fashionable accessories as much as they are functional tools. So you had a market with a strong dichotomy. On one end, there were these standalone watches that were great for fitness and outdoors activities, but they lacked a lot of the smart features of their DC counterparts, like having limited smart connectivity features and app ecosystems. The user experience often also wasn't as seamless for things like phone calls or messaging or voice assistants. They all had proprietary operating systems compared to the slick integrated experience of the device complementary watches with Android Wear OS or iOS. Some of these, like the Garmin Fenix, had superb activity tracking and GPS tracking, but they were not as smart or as stylish as something like the Apple Watch. Now that I've complained about all the drawbacks of early smartwatches, I have to admit that here and now in the 2020s, I have succumbed to smartwatch consumerism. Yes, it is another device that will one day break or fail, and yes, it's another thing to worry about charging, and yes, it's a lot more expensive than this $12 Casio. It's really damn good. If you're watching this with a smartwatch strapped on, what was it that eventually made you get one? Were you an early adopter, or was there like a really good tech demo or a friend's recommendation, or what? Let me know in the comments. Garmin was once known only as the GPS king, but they've become really top of class with their health integration and fitness sensors into their watches. How they got the funding for such incredible strides, we may never know. But we do know that somewhere along the way, Garmin hired someone with eyeballs, which was a great move for them because they started making watches that were not only incredibly functional, but kind of good looking too. But what's the benefit of a Garmin smartwatch over the other two big options, Wear OS and the Apple Watch? The Apple Watch is stylish and has a great, albeit fixed, user experience. Android Wear OS watches are a little more customizable and perhaps a little bit smarter. I'm a snobby Android user, so an Apple Watch was off the table, although many of my criticisms of smartwatches are 100% applicable to the Apple Watch as well. When it comes to Wear OS watches, I actually did own one for a little while. It was an Asus ZenWatch 3, and it was super cool, and it was feature-rich, and it got a lot of compliments. But here are the reasons why I ditched my Wear OS smartwatch. Its basic functions were really solid, and the foundation of Wear OS is actually really smart and feature-rich. And I still miss gesture navigation on my Garmin watch quite a bit. I still sometimes try and do it out of thin air. It's like having a phantom limb or something. But my Wear OS smartwatch would die in under a day, making the battery life worse than my sick-ass Nexus 6P at the time.
Doesn't look like there's any bulge at least, so that's a good thing.
And in that case, what's the point of even having a smartwatch if it's going to die on my wrist by dinner time? Quick side note, there are some interesting Wear OS watches that have come out recently. Notably, the OnePlus Watch 2 utilizes a hybrid operating system to squeeze 3 days, give or take, of battery life. That's really impressive for a Wear OS watch, but it's still 3 days, and while the watch is stylish and tempting, it's really heavy too. Garmin, of course, had a legacy of function over form, but again, they experienced a sudden glow-up. The assistant integration is really weak compared to its competition, but it sure packs a lot of high-quality sensors. It can't create a Bitmoji of your face, and it can't run Doom, but it has made me run more. I love data so much, you have no idea. I maintained a daily habit spreadsheet for years where I would track things like stress, sleep quality, medication, hydration, weather impacts, and more. I do that because I want to understand how my environment and the things that I do and put into my body affect my mood, my energy, and how I treat people. I purchased the Garmin Venu 3S with hesitation, but within a week I was fully bought in on the fitness smartwatch cult. It does, frankly, everything that I would need a watch to do, just like my old Casio wristwatch. It also does most of the stuff that I wanted out of a smartwatch. Things like phone notifications, heart rate monitoring, step counting, and answering phone calls. It also does a number of things that I didn't know I wanted until I had them. First off, body battery. What the hell was I doing all these years guessing at this? The body battery is a culmination of several different sensors and inputs that help you determine where your body battery or energy level is at. This isn't all that useful on a day-to-day or in the moment, but it's fantastic for identifying trends over time. Second is hydration tracking. I track my water intake through this watch, and the tiny ways that gamifies hydration helps me out a lot. My daily hydration target moves based on how much I'm exercising or I'm stressed. It even has customizable presets for different amounts of water for my different water bottles. Third is stress score. In the fitness world, stress is simply a measure of pushing yourself, and it isn't necessarily negative. Here's some examples of stressful events in a fitness sense. Taking a pleasant bike ride, getting screamed at in highway traffic, talking with a friend at a party, or watching a horror movie. All of those things can have a stressful impact on your body and mind. This stress score also inevitably skyrockets after a night of drinking, which has encouraged me to make more healthy and moderated choices for myself. This stress score is primarily determined by a sensor that measures heart rate variation, or HRV. My HRV has even gotten good at predicting when I'm going to get sick. Whenever I do get sick, I can look back and note that my HRV score skyrocketed a couple days beforehand. That's an amazing example of wearable technology improving a user's life. And that's one of the reasons that I love a fitness-forward smartwatch. It's not about connecting me to my phone better and putting advertisers in touch with me easier or helping me doom scroll social media or anything. It's about getting good data to help me make better choices for my health. Garmin has always had good and reliable sensors, which gives you good and reliable raw data. The addition of these interpretive scores has been really excellent in helping you understand what that raw data means to you. You can have all the sensors and raw data in the world, but still lack the interpretation of it. I think I made it pretty clear how I feel about battery life on smartwatches. I really dislike having to charge my technology. It's half the reason I have a OnePlus phone, and it's almost entirely the reason that I have a Garmin smartwatch. This thing lasts over a week with standard use, and that includes bike rides with satellite tracking, daily strength workouts, and being constantly connected to my phone. I recently wore this watch on a 10-day trip all around Iceland, and I only had to charge it once, which was fantastic because I was going on lots of hikes where I was definitely tracking myself with the GPS because I kept getting lost everywhere, and it was raining because all it does is rain there. Oh, and that's another really good part of this watch is that you can go swimming in it and not worry at all about it. You can slip and stumble into a waterfall in Iceland, and it's totally fine. And on that note, it's also really sturdy. And I'm shocked at how sturdy it is considering how pretty it also is. I think we're conditioned with premium looking technology to treat it as super fragile, but this is a really nice exception to that rule, where it's a really good looking watch and it's also shockingly sturdy. This watch has the misfortune of being attached to someone with the coordination of a wounded bumblebee, and it's still fine. I've crashed my bike wearing it, I've run into multiple door frames, I've dropped it in the road twice, and it still looks this good. Lastly, the smart stuff. Fitness aside, this watch is smarter than a fifth grader, but only just. It simply can't compare to the integrations afforded to Apple and Wear OS as the purveyors of their own operating systems. I can still play and control music on it, and I can still control what phone apps are able to push notifications to it, and I can still even access a little Garmin app store for it. But the comparison ends there. The rest of it is pretty weak compared to the competition. However, there's a charm to it. I've worn a watch my whole life, and I only wanted to wear a smartwatch if it enabled me to be a better person. These days, though, my smartphone seems to drag me backwards from who I want to be. I get stuck scrolling and reacting, and scrolling and downvoting, and scrolling and tapping prizes. It's exhausting. But a watch that pushes me to get outdoors and to fill my water bottle and enables me to leave my phone at home, that's great. Now it can't run Subway Surfers, and it can't scroll Twitter, and it can't connect to my Alexa-enabled smart mug / Bluetooth blanket or anything. And that's okay, because that's not the point. And that helps me get a little closer to the point of anything. Told you I'd get there.